Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's Monday morning. It's Monday morning. The 30th of December. So tomorrow is New Year's, and we are about to put a wrap on 2024. It was a good year. It was a not so good year. I mean, political discord aside, we're still surviving. The cafe's still here. I'm doing 2 side jobs to help keep that alive, but it is what it is, you know. And one of the side jobs is me DJing again in Rochester, Minnesota here, which is about 25 minutes away. And the place I've got into is a real good fit for me. And unfortunately, it's paying me half of what I used to make in the Twin Cities. But you have to start somewhere. And it's a smaller pond, but I'll be able to become a bigger fish in this pond pretty quickly. And I'm already developing quite a following and quite a appreciation for what I do. And for those of you who don't remember how I DJ, I play from 7 decades, from the 50s all the way through to the present. So from Billie Holiday to Adele, from Chappell Roan back to Ella Fitzgerald. I mean, everything in between, the blues, reggae, hip-hop, funk, soul music, 80s pop, rock, I mean yacht rock, which is all just kind of soft rock R&B really, which is what it is. It all comes from black music almost entirely. I mean, there's very little in the pop lexicon that doesn't have its roots in black American music. Very little. And even most of what extrapolates beyond black music, there's still threads of the blues, threads of R&B, threads of jazz avant-gardism. I mean, if you listen to Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, it's a departure, for sure, but there's still elements of rhythm and blues and the doo-wop singers and elements of straight R&B and jump blues and elements of the avant-garde. I mean, the sounds of Monk and Mingus and Ellington, those great composers of the jazz canon. I mean, it's hard to escape the breadth of what Ellington encompasses, and then guys like Mingus and Monk kind of layer on top of that. And then Parker's innovations, the virtuosity, I mean, it just reveals itself throughout all of the threads of modern music. I've said many times before, Armstrong and the way he sings behind the beat with cheek and personality and inflection and intonation. All of what Louis Armstrong does as a singer, the entire world of pop music is borrowing from what Louis provided. I mean, before Louis, we sang very much from the page and very much in a sacrosanct kind of sanctified way with the reverence of what the original artist had in mind. We're trying to get into the headspace of what that guy was trying to get across. And Armstrong and people like Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, and many, many more took that and turned it on its head and allowed their own experience to inflect upon the lyric and to oftentimes completely change the meaning of a lyric just through inflection and personality. And I mean, Armstrong could do it with I mean, those eyes of his. You watch some of that video of him, Armstrong could really suggest emotional states with an expression. Then you layer on top of that his playing and his singing, and it all just becomes this live in the moment capturing of how a person feels, the immediacy of that art. I mean, from a hip hop MC freestyling to a blues guitar player innovating and expressing a little bend and a little, that's all the feeling of black art, expressing and emoting its condition here in the world today. And so when you layer together the sounds of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s into the last 20 years, nothing is too removed from the fabric that the oppressed Black American emoted and expressed. And it links and connects everything in a series of snakes and ladders. You can go forward a few decades, you can come back a few decades, but it's all interwoven. I mean, and hip-hop and R&B are two great examples of, I mean, so much of hip-hop is rooted in its R&B ancestry. If you listen to some of the modern singers of today, Teddy Swims is layered in old rhythm and blues. It's filled with it. If you listen to Sabrina Carpenter, I mean, a lot of that stuff underneath is funk disco beats, R&B beats. I mean, it's really inescapable, and I've talked about it many times, but so people are really responding to it. And what's cool about my sets is that it's such a broad spectrum of what I play that if you sit there for 30 minutes, I'm going to touch on something that is familiar to you and comfortable to you and that you love. And it ends up embracing and bringing most people in the room in to what I'm doing. And DJing can be a kind of an elitist, self-indulgent art form for many. And many people cringe when they see a DJ, to be honest. Oh, I get to hear this guy's opinion for 2 hours on one note. And as a musician, music lover myself, I used to despise many DJs because they were so self-indulgent, so self-absorbed, almost irreverent to the rest of the room and what was happening and the vibe and the temperature of the room. And a good DJ should always be conscious of who's in the room, how old are they, what's their gender, what's their race, what's their mood, what's the time of the year, what time of the day is it, how drunk is everybody. I mean, your volume, your tempo, all these things, how big the songs are in terms of popularity. All these things should have dynamic peaks and valleys. And so it's really fun kind of playing for a whole new town with thousands upon thousands of years of experience under my belt. And just seeing people's eyes light up and tangibly making those connections and tangibly feeling just the breadth of the music. From Skeeter Davis and Patsy Cline. I mean, I threw some fun stuff in my set last night. I played last night. And I've been there 8 times now, I think, in the last 2 months. And they just gave me 7 more dates for the next couple months. So, I mean, it's definitely helping my bottom line. It's not paying, like I said, even half what I made in Minneapolis. But it's you got to start somewhere. And the respect and the appreciation and the establishment certainly seeing that I can entertain a room of people. And what I do is very broad in its spectrum and will appeal to almost anybody in the room. And I'm not belligerent. I'm not going to just ignore who's in the room and play for myself. I'm going to try to hit that cross section of everybody that's in there from every age and everyone who's represented. And they've actually called me 3 times now when a band has canceled for health or weather reasons and say, hey, can you come fill in? The band canceled. So they're seeing me as a go-to option, which is fantastic. So hopefully I can keep building that. And maybe it'll even spill over here to the coffee shop, which is, like I said, 25 minutes away from Rochester. But hopefully it'll still raise some eyebrows and bring some people out this way. And I've actually had a few people show up at the gig and put 2 and 2 together. Like, oh, you're the dude with the coffee shop, There was a guy last night who was loving my set, just loving it. And he wanted to give me a tip, and he had to use PayPal because he didn't have cash. And I was telling him about my collection. He's like, man, the only person I know with a collection like that is this coffee shop in Elgin. I'm like, yeah, that's me. And he had been here before, but I cut my hair since then, and it had been over a year ago. And so, I mean, it's kind of fun seeing those threads be connected. So it's nice to be kind of back doing something I'm good at and that I love to do, and like I really have fun. And I ended up playing, I think, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 10 in the evening, 7 hours, which is a long set. But when it's fun and people are responding, it goes by super fast. It just blows by. And when you have such a wide canon to select from, you don't get disinterested. And I'm playing from my laptop, but I'm also playing from 5 crates of records, 2 crates of 45s. And so it's just there's a wide spectrum of stuff for me to play from, which really keeps it interesting for myself, the staff, and all the patrons. So What I'm going to show you today is some stuff I brought with me yesterday that's jazz related. Some of which I played, some of which I didn't. But we're starting off with Gene Ammons, which is actually what we're listening to in the background here. Ammons is an interesting character. Ammons, of course, is the son of the great Albert Ammons, one of the great Kansas City boogie-woogie piano players. And Albert was a fantastic player. And Gene was that next generation. And of course, and at that point, a guy from the 20s and 30s, his son was going to come up in the 40s and 50s. And Gene was a fantastic tenor player who makes some pretty incredible all-star sessions for Prestige in the early to mid-50s. This has Art Farmer, Lou Donaldson, Freddie Redd, Sonny Stitt, who actually often did battles with, is on some of this. Kenny Clark's on some of this. It's a great cover. And Ammons, unfortunately, spent numerous portions of his career incarcerated for drug addictions and possessions. And he lost big chunks of his life and his career to those silly drug laws that were obviously very racial in their creation. They were meant to kind of undo the advances of civil rights in a lot of ways. And they were certainly targeting minorities and incarcerating minorities very unjustly and unfairly here in America. But Ammons is a great player. And, even when he returns from some of his incarcerations to the scene, he was always fairly well received and seen as a luminary and a guy whose star would probably have ascended higher in the jazz hierarchy had he not been removed from the scene at times. I mean, there's times where guys like John Coltrane are his sidemen. I mean, Donald Byrd, he was playing with some incredible jam session at Prestige in 54, 55, 56. Those records are incredible. And this is 70-50, which probably puts in 1956, maybe 57. And if I remember, it's actually from two different sessions. Yeah, it is. And some of these songs are actually from 50 and 51. So this is actually almost all then from the 10-inch era. And it is from two completely different sessions. And the Stitt stuff's fantastic, but I'm a huge fan of Gene Ammons, and this is a great record worth seeking out. Next record I want to show you is Jazz Track, the great Miles Davis session. That's kind of one of the cool sextet sessions Miles does with Cannonball and Evans and Chambers and Cobb and Coltrane. That fits in between Someday My Prince Will Come and Sketches in Kind of Blue. It's from 58. It wasn't released right away, and it was actually coupled with the French soundtrack, The Escalator to the Gallows, which was the English interpretation of that. But Columbia finally got the rights to that and coupled it with some stuff that hadn't been released from 58. And I think it comes out in 60, maybe 1260, maybe 61. I can't remember exactly when this comes out, to be honest. But On Green Dolphin Street's fantastic. Stella by Starlight's fantastic. And I think they just reissued this on some format with another track that was also unreleased. Old 6i. I love Green Dolphin Street on here. It's one of my favorite versions of that song, which of course was a jazz staple that many people did wonderful versions of. A record I played that last night. I played this last night as well, Oscar Moore. And Oscar was a fantastic guitar player. If I remember, he played with Nat Cole for a while, on Nat's trios early on, before Irving Ashby replaced him. But he's a fantastic player. And this came out on Skylark initially. And it was initially a 10-inch, which actually I do have the 10-inch. And this is a much later 12-inch LP. I think it's a Japanese pressing. But, so it's a quick run because it was a 10-inch. But he's a fantastic player. If you hear him at tempo, he's a blistering, fantastic lyricist on the guitar. He can really weave you a tale. Does it show you who the sidemen were here? I don't think it does. Yeah, this is great stuff, and as I've said many times, I love playing jazz guitar at my gigs. It's just a wonderful language that many people are really comfortable with is the guitar. So putting jazz guitar into sets, it doesn't feel like such a deviation as something very horn-driven. Johnny Hartman on Bethlehem. And Hartman, of course, we come to through Coltrane on Impulse. And it's really Hartman, along with Mingus, that drew me to the Bethlehem label. And those of you who know me and know this channel know I'm a huge proponent of the Bethlehem label. And it's really these Hartman titles, which there's like 2 or 3, that made me go, what is this Bethlehem label? Because Bethlehem is very much an underappreciated, undocumented label, especially for jazz beginners. And they had the wonderful Burt Goldblatt covers, which a lot of the labels from the early 50s had. The beautiful red label logo with the silver print and the little wreath up at the top. Finding an old Bethlehem's always a treat. And I can tell you from having the entire 200 title canon, the Bethlehem canon's really, really incredibly solid. Always great musicianship, always great production. One of Creed Taylor's early stops in his career was here working with Gus Wilde at Bethlehem. And last night I played Down in the Depths on the 90th Floor, the Cole Porter song. Jay Cave, Ralph Sharon on the piano, Howard McGee's on the trumpet playing some wonderful stuff. A guy by the name of Christy Febo on the drums, who that might be a nom de plume. But Hartman's wonderful, rich baritone, this obviously precedes his Coltrane stuff. And there's a Roost title that's really, really rare. And these 2 Bethlehem sessions, and there's one other session, Savoy at Regent. And the Regent one's probably the rarest of the bunch. They're all hard to track down. I love Hartman's work. And when Coltrane was asked to make a record with a singer by Bob Thiel at Impulse, something that Coltrane had never even really contemplated to that point. And Impulse wanted some commercial Coltrane that was more down the lines of My Favorite Things, which he did with Atlantic, and was a really big successful song. And he comes to Impulse, signs a contract giving him a lot of creative freedom. And the aforementioned Creed Taylor was kind of the guy who helped bring him to Impulse. And that creative freedom gave Coltrane a carte blanche to do whatever the fuck he wanted, which meant Africa Brass and some really confrontational, difficult, socially charged political music that was not what Creed Taylor had in mind. He wanted My Favorite Things, which of course is one of the reasons why eventually he leaves the label and moves on to Verve. Of course, the money Verve threw at him probably didn't hurt at all. But when Bob Thiel takes over, they do make some really commercial, accessible, and Creed Taylor might have actually been at the helm of a couple of those, but ballads with Duke Ellington, the Coleman Hawkins records of the same era. There's some beautiful lyrical Coltrane that Impulse documents there in the 62, 61, 63. And of course, the record with Johnny Hartman is one of the greatest lyrical jazz records ever. And to hear the great Coltrane dueling with Hartman's wonderful, rich baritone, Lush Life is just unforgettable. It's one of my favorite renditions of that song. And it's always great to hear a guy like Coltrane, who played with so much ferocity from his time with Miles to his time Sheets of Sound at Prestige to his own quartet. He's always just this volume of notes sorting through the chaos of life with his horn. And so to hear him more restrained and constrained with Ellington and with Hartman, it's a real testament to how lyrical a player Coltrane could be. So though that record with Hartman had the added benefit of kind of keeping Johnny Hartman's name in the back of our minds. And for anybody who digs into Coltrane, which is one of the first stops on the jazz train. I mean, you come into Jazz through Miles, which leads you to Train, and then Train leads you to, Blue Note and a lot of the other places in the jazz world. And Miles, of course, takes you to a lot of different places too, the Wayne Shorters and all the different stops. But Hartman is one of those connections that it's a small little subway stop, but once you get to that Johnny Hartman interchange, it takes you back to some really wonderful eras of post-war jazz that I'm deeply in love with. Now this is on Savoy, and I played a song off this last night. I can't remember what song I played, to be honest, because I just kind of flipped through the tracks in my headphones looking for a song that felt tempo right. But this is the great Milt Jackson, Detroit native, one of the real progenitors of the vibraphone, next to Lionel Hampton. Really, he's probably the greatest vibraphone player in jazz history. A guy that was incredibly church-oriented in terms of how he played with that gospel and that blues. The rhythm and blues just pours through him. And of course, he was kind of constrained at times playing with the modern jazz quartet with John Lewis for decades. And so he does a lot of work as a leader on the side that is more that Detroit rhythm and blues. And it's quite different hearing him play outside of the modern jazz quartet. And even the MJQ early on was a much more traditional sounding quartet, back when Kenny Clark and Ray Brown were in the group, which was on Savoy, to be honest. It's when they get to Atlantic later where they start doing a little bit more of that third stream, compositional meets improvisation of jazz. That stuff's definitely a departure from what this 50s era stuff was. And classic Savoy minimalist cover. 2 different sessions here. Lucky Thompson's on some of this, Wade Legge, Wayne Marshall, Kenny Clark. Billy Mitchell's on the sax on some of this, Curly Russell. Julius Watkins plays French horn on some of these sessions. So, I mean, just great. Early 50s. Again, probably this was 10-inch material initially. And I can't say enough about the great Milt Jackson. I didn't play nothing from this last night, but Anita O'Day, one of the great singers of the jazz era. And if I remember, she was with Stan Kenton for a while. And she was really one of the leaders of the jazz vocal encampment with, along with Ella Fitzgerald's and Sarah Vaughan, a real virtuoso who had a surprising amount of blues in her delivery, and I like the way she enunciates and kind of pronounces, and there's some cheek in her voice. She was a very big name in jazz when she kind of goes off on her own in the jazz scene. And this has fantastic backing here with Barney Kessel, Monty Budwig, Jack Mills, Arnold Ross. I mean, just wow. She played with Gene Krupa for a while as well. But Anita O'Day's discography is pretty vast. And of course, Norman Granz signs her in '54. There's some 10-inch stuff and a bunch of LP stuff. And she's kind of at the root of the 4000 sequence on the Verve label, which was a bit of a poppier, lighter side of jazz and the Verve canon. And I think for me, it kind of discredited her somewhat being in that sequence, because most of the real jazz titles were either in the Ella sequence or in the 8000 sequence. I'm sorry, she was in the 2000. Ella was the 4000. So Verve has these different series. And the 8000 is the main sequence. And the 4000 was the Ella sequence, which was mostly Ella titles and stuff that was kind of in that same vein as her. And there was a 2000 sequence as well, which also reissues some of the Norgran Clef stuff. And it's usually a bit poppier, a little lighter. And a lot of Anita O'Day stuff ends up in that spectrum. And it's like Clef Norgran, it's hard to really tell. I mean, there's shades of the difference between the two imprints, but they were very similar. Same artist, same label, same production, same management. But you do feel like Norgran's a little bit more cool and hip and youthful, whereas the Clef stuff is a little bit more rooted in the old school and the swing cats. But with the 2000 sequence, again, it's just a slightly more accessible sequence, I think, was probably what Norman was having in mind there. But a lot of Anita O'Day's stuff ends up in that sequence, which I was collecting the 8,000, I was collecting the 4,000. And so I kind of came to her a little later than I probably should have. And there's no question she's one of the great singers of that or any era. And if you had a chance to see Anita O'Day perform, she always ripped the roof off the place, and people always said how amazing a performer she was. Now we're talking to Al Casey, Moodsville, and I played a song after this last night. I'm trying to think what it was. It might have been These Foolish Things. This is with Lee Anderson, Jimmy Lewis, and Belton Evans. And the Moodsville sequence at Prestige was a little sub-label that Bob Weinstock did. And the Moods, there's Swingsville and Moodsville, they're kind of synonymous in a way. They usually both feature artists from the swing era in small group format, often playing with a ton of blues and a ton of gospel. None of the elements of the modernity of bebop are present. None of the hard bop. It's very much rooted in the old school, but it's still very much in small group settings. So it's actually still very contemporary and very modern. And again, people kind of avoid Moodsville and Swingsville. But I think those names kind of make you think, oh, this is going to be light jazz. It's not light jazz. It's just less modern than some of the more difficult stuff that was happening in the 7,000 sequence and the new jazz sequence and around the jazz world with the modern young kids. Casey was a fantastic player. I think he's very forgotten today, sadly. A great guitarist. Just one of those guys that is really... I think he might have played with Basie for a while, if I remember. It's been a minute. I think he worked with King Curtis for a while as well. Coleman Hawkins. He played with a lot of cats. Great stuff. And it's one of those records that, because of the imprint that it's on, you can stumble on that at a record store for $10. And let me tell you, boy, it's a treat. It's a fantastic treat. And I think I'm actually going to put this on. Just a light, nimble player. Love jazz like this. And again, there's more substance to it than many would have you believe. It's fantastic stuff. We talked Mobley last episode. I brought Roll Call. I don't think I actually played nothing from it last night, but it's always a great record, and I'm not going to dive into Mobley again today. I brought Bud Shank, Barefoot Adventure, which is a soundtrack featuring the great Carmel Jones, the Kansas City trumpet player, and the great Bob Cooper. And Cooper was one of the great tenor players of the West Coast scene that's kind of forgotten today. He does some work at contemporary as well as Pacific jazz. And Bud Shank's one of the great multi-instrumentalists of this or any era. He played most of the woodwind instruments, alto sax, flute, clarinet. Shank's a fantastic player. A young hip kid who made so many records for Pacific, and when they grafted themselves into World Pacific, there's just so many Bud Shank records. And he kind of crosses over into a bit of the jazz light. I mean, AM, radio, very commercially accessible, doing Michelle, and pop jazz renditions of current songs. But his jazz pedigree is undeniable, and his 50s body of work into the early 60s is heavy lifting. It's not some light saccharine stuff like some of his later stuff became. And even that later stuff, there's tons of still heavy, incredible jazz in there. There's just a lot of kind of more accessible titles mixed in. Shank always worked with the best of the players. I love all of his early work on the West Coast. Gary Peacock shows up on the bass here. Dennis Budemir's on the guitar. Bruce Brown, Shelly Mann's on the drums. Just a fantastic, fun record. which I don't think I played last night. I brought a fun record here, The Exotic Sounds of Arthur Lyman. And Arthur Lyman was a fantastic kind of... I remember he played the vibraphones. And he worked with... Oh man, who did he work with? A seminal player of a similar genre. Martin Denny. He worked with Martin Denny, who was also one of the kings of the exotic lounge sound of the late 50s, early 60s, diving into Polynesian and Hawaiian sounds. And he was actually a Hawaiian native. And I mean, there's a lot of jazz influence in what they do and virtuosity, but it's also very light and it's light on the blues, heavier on the playing, but it's fun. And I didn't play this last night, but I'll bring it again next time, and maybe I'll get to it. I bring a lot of stuff. One of the fun things I did play last night was Time After Time, Miles Davis, cover of the great Cyndi Lauper song. And Cyndi says here, I feel very honored and touched that a great jazz artist like Miles has recorded a song so special to me. That's Cyndi Lauper's little note on there. And it's a wonderful version with a lot of soul and feel that Miles brings to what's a fairly, I mean, it's not really a saccharine pop song. It's a pop song with some depth to it, but it's fun stuff, and people respond to that song when I play it. The great house singer, one of the great, again, forgotten tenor players of this era, along with the fantastic Charlie Shavers, and then Ray Bryant, one of the great piano players of this era. Again, Prestige. This is Swingsville, this one, 2023. And Hal is, again, one of those forgotten players who is just a fantastic, very rooted in the blues player. Had a strong influence from guys like Coleman Hawkins and Don Byas. He might have played with Basie for a while, if I remember, but most guys did, it seems like. If you're African American, you probably played with Basie or Ellington for a while. Charlie Shavers is one of the great trumpet players that's really forgotten. And I played something from this last night. I don't remember where I played, but wonderful, wonderful R&B inflected jazz. I played this fantastic record last night. The great Marlene Replank. She's a wonderful, wonderful singer. I Think of You With Every Breath I Take is one of my favorite jazz singers. And what's really, really special about this record is who's backing her. And no person in the jazz universe is more at the mercy of the people that she's playing with or that they're playing with than a singer. If you end up with a very commercial orchestra, you're going to make a commercial record. If you're playing with a great jazz group, you're going to make a very great jazz and vocal record. She's backed here by the great Wendell Marshall, Kenny Clark, staples of the Savoy label, Hank Jones, staple of the Savoy label, with the great Joe Wilder on the trumpet. And Wilder plays some of the most muted, haunting echoes to her vocals, which haunts back to the black church of the preacher and the choir kind of call and response, which is driven home wonderfully in that song I mentioned, With Every Breath I Take, when she's singing some of her phrasing and Joe Wilder's kind of echoing her with this just ethereal, mystical, muted trumpet. It's some of the most beautiful music that this planet's ever made. It's gorgeous stuff. And a young Herbie Mann shows up on here as well. Herbie, very young in his career. Great stuff, and people respond to that, man. I played some Joe DeRisi last night. Joe was a great East Coast, kind of a lounge lizard type of singer. He's got some Tony Bennett in him, some Mel Torme. I played Swinging on a Star, a real fun, fast, up-tempo number. The great Nick Stabulus is on the drums here. Jack Brokensha's on the vibes. Dick Healy's on the flute. Errol Buttles on the bassoon and the tenor sax. Interesting lineup here. Again, you got Bethlehem, East Coast stuff. The Australian Jazz Quartet backs them up on some of this. Just a real, like I said, if you like Bennett, if you like Mel Torme, he's in that vein of somewhat of a lounge lizard, but still, I mean, still with a real strong jazz pedigree. He was also a great pianist in his own right. In his other Bethlehem title, he actually sits at the piano and sings and plays. This one's a bit more of a produced, arranged session. Horace Parlan, this is what I closed my night out with last night, Heading South. And I ended up playing 2 songs from it just to end the night out. I think it was Summertime and Lowdown. And Al Harewood and Ray Barretto on the conga add a real wonderful kind of Latin feel at times, which is why it's called Heading South, because that Latin feel. But George Tucker plays some bowed bass that's just absolutely melancholic and beautiful. And there's this part on, I think it must be on Low Down, where Parlan plays the same phrase over and over and over and over, and long enough where you think the record might be skipping. But it's just them kind of in this trance-like moment that's just ethereal and beautiful, and I'm a huge fan of it. And then Ellis Larkin's Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me. Ellis was a fantastic pianist, very forgotten today. He backed up Ella Fitzgerald on some of her great recordings, worked for Decca. This is on the Storyville label out of Boston. So George Ween had him at his club a few times and produced some sessions for him. I like Ellis Larkin's work a lot. This might be actually a compilation of his 2 10-inches at Storyville, which also had great Burt Goldblatt covers. This LP didn't get that good fortune having a Goldblatt cover. And of course, Ellington, Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me. You can't ever go wrong with Ellington compositions. Larkin was a great player, a real lyricist, and a beautiful guy that was highly sought after to put behind singers because of his ability to kind of comp and never detract attention from the singer too strongly, and always kind of really compliment what the singer was about. So that's some of the stuff I brought to my gig last night, much of which I played a song from or two, and it just shows you how versatile jazz is and how it can dovetail into all your rhythm and blues and your funk and your soul and your pop. And so much of what is in the modern world today, from Teddy Swims to Adele, is still rooted in a lot of the same foundational concrete. It goes back to these roots. And it's not hard to lace this stuff together and to put it into the vocabulary for people so that when they're digesting their food, they're also digesting the roots of modern music and understanding how little really anything has changed. What changes the most is technology, how we make these sounds. Many of the sounds don't change. Many of the sounds of the swing era are made today by synths and samplers and modern equipment, creating the same swells and counter movements and feel that they made with orchestras back in the day. All that's changed is the instrumentation. The notes are the same, the chords are the same, the compositions are the same, melody doesn't change. The rhythm, even really the rhythms don't change. They might straighten it out here, they might complicate it there, but so much of it's still written with a language that's very much similar. And it's really fun to be able to lace all that together for people. So hope you all enjoy that episode. It's really fun to be back and doing what I do. And I love doing the coffee shop. I love being here, sharing with people. But it's probably more efficient to share music with people in this way and then have them come here and delve deeper if they want to. So appreciate you all. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe, hit the thumbs up, like the video. If you want to support the channel in any way deeper, there's the Patreon page, there's PayPal thanks, there's YouTube thanks. Every donation helps to help keep the jazz that we want to talk about alive. I mean, it's frustrating to me to see how superficial so much of the jazz discussion still is. And how many times I'll see someone post a video on one of the Facebook groups and someone else will comment like, oh yeah, I have that record. I got a first pressing. It sounds great. Who fucking cares? What about that player's amazing? Oh, I love the innovation on that record. I love the sound, the spirit, the groove, the mood, the feel, the sociology behind it. Give me some insight. You tell me you have it as well and that you have this pressing of it. You're telling me about you, not about the record. Tell me about the fucking record. I get so sick of this fucking pablum of people just resuscitating the same fucking titles, talking about the pressings and which ones they have. Like it's somehow I should care about you. If you post a record by somebody, let's talk about that somebody, not about what version you have of it. It's just, every time I do it, it makes my blood kind of curdle. I'm like, oh, God damn it. That's your only insight into that record. You have it, and this is the version you have of it. Nothing more. You can't even say, oh, I think it's amazing because of this, that, or that. Whatever. I'll move on. Anyway, y'all be safe. Have a great day. Love you all. Appreciate your support. Keep listening to that jazz, spreading the gospel. This is American history on foot. Tell them that story one person at a time. Expressing from the honesty and integrity of a man's soul and heart. What a powerful condition that is. Y'all be safe. We'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.